Welcome to Performance Science, a podcast exploring the science of performing and the role of performance in society. I am Professor Aaron Williamon, head of the Centre for Performance Science, a partnership of the Royal College of Music and Imperial College London. Here in the Centre for Performance Science, our research examines and reflects on what performing can tell us about how people interact, develop, work, learn, and play. The podcast encourages us to think differently about the ways in which performing is part of our lives. And in this series, I'm interested in exploring how performers support their own well-being, as well as how they meet the distinctive and sometimes intense challenges of their work. Recapping the last 3 episodes, we have outlined some key challenges facing performers today, from financial instability to a multitude of risk factors related to physical and mental well-being. But is it all bad news? Today, we want to look at the next steps for the creative workforce and what we can learn from Heart's professional research. We saw through the Heart's Professional Project that the pandemic allowed some artists to reconnect with their practice and made them even more committed to the socially impactful sides of their work. Many talked about setting up their own businesses or diversifying their professional portfolios, which seemed in turn to enrich their sense of well-being. Other performers spoke about the value of the new networks and communities with which they were able to connect. I'm delighted today to be joined by guest Josh Siepel from the Creative Industries Policy and Evidence Center and Rosie Perkins, researcher at the Royal College of Music. Josh, if I may start with you, could you describe the Policy and Evidence Center? What do you do there?
So the AHRC Creative Industries Policy and Evidence Center is a major investment by the Arts and Humanities Research Council, funded by the UK government, which has aimed since its creation in 2018 to build an evidence base for understanding the nature, what's going on in the creative industries. And we're now in our second round of funding. We started in 2018, running to 2023, when we were affiliated with Nesta. As of last year, we moved, and the creative PEC, as we call it, is now based between Newcastle and the Royal Society of Arts. And what we try to do within the creative PEC is to produce academic quality, robust evidence that helps to build an understanding for policymakers, particularly in the UK, but also worldwide, about the nature of creative industries, what's going on in creative industries, and trying to help to build a better understanding of the way that they interact with space, with workers, with innovation, with trade, in all these different areas, trying to strengthen and understand our understanding so that policymakers have an understanding.
In terms of the way that you work with data and evidence, how then do you work to translate that into systems of mentoring and support? How would the day-to-day performing artist interact and engage with the center?
I think a lot of the work that we do is more about providing a broad picture and a broad sense of background for creative practitioners in general. So one of the things that we were able to do is on our website, which is www.pec.ac.uk, you can go and you can see a lot of baseline statistics about the creative industries. And the reason why that is interesting and relevant is a lot of creative workers tend to find themselves having to battle saying, oh, it's just this nice thing you do. Oh, it's really nice that you're a musician. Oh, it's really nice that you're an artist. It's really nice that you work in film sectors, or that you, all of these things. But the thing that tends to be missed is that actually the economic contribution of the creative industries is huge. The creative industries represents a massive chunk of the UK economy, well over £100 billion a year in GVA, gross value added. And one of the things I think that we try to do in terms of our evidence building perspective is trying to provide some resources for people to be able to look at that. And so it's not necessarily perhaps a direct mentoring role where we're directly working with people, although we do actually build and work with people across a very diverse range through our stakeholder groups and through our works, and also with some of our researchers as well. But part of what we're trying to do is to build that evidence base so people can look to it and say, actually, you know what? I'm actually part of something big here. I'm not just on this island. I'm actually part of a really major part of the economic success of the UK.
So that broader context and community is important for all artists, and especially for early career artists who are finding their way fresh in the field. Rosie, if I can ask you, through our research on the Hearts Project, what did you find in terms of the different motivations that early career artists have, and what kind of creative communities are they actually seeking?
Yeah, so we did some qualitative research with 16 artists from different art sectors to understand their experiences during the pandemic and to think about the impact of the pandemic on their personal and their professional development, and also their perceptions of the role of the arts, not only during the pandemic, but also looking into the future. And it was striking that a lot of what they talked about was this sense of wanting change, a kind of appetite for change. They were already very much thinking through to the future, and they had quite strong and quite clear views on that future. And there were two main things that we synthesized from the data. First was that these early career artists, who were all within the first 10 years of their careers, they wanted creative communities that are really inclusive, with much more diversity in audiences and people engaging with the arts. I think they were worried that the pandemic would make divisions and inequalities within the creative industries worse, and also that more people would be excluded from working or staying working in the arts. And they were also worried that fewer people would have the opportunity to engage with the arts in their day-to-day lives. So they spoke about things like the criticality of widening audiences, finding different ways to do that, emphasizing this in the work that they wanted to do, but also expecting it and asking it of the cultural organizations that they're working with. And secondly, they saw the sort of post-COVID era, I suppose. We spoke to them in 2021, so we were just sort of coming out of some of the main lockdowns. And they saw this time as one of sort of hope and change, a possibility to sort of positively disrupt what's going on in the creative communities. So thinking about trying to create creative communities that are really valued among the general population, where there's this real sense of, yes, this is important to our country, to what's going on. And also among people who are making policies that directly affect them. So, we are important. Look at how people have engaged in the arts during the pandemic. Look how important that's been. Look how important and valued this work is and needs to be, and that needs to be fully recognised. And within that, they told us about using hybrid forums, using technology to find different ways of doing their practice during the pandemic, and wanting to foster and harness that post-pandemic to allow the arts to become more part of day-to-day life, more open to different types of people. So they were looking, I think, for more equitable, fairer, and more diverse industry that protects and supports artists and engages more flexibly with broader audiences.
Following on from that, can I ask both of you to reflect on how we might go about how different sorts of stakeholders within this field can go about encouraging more diverse creative communities? So if that's what artists are saying they would like to see going through the shock of this pandemic that we've been through, where it really, and in particular, hurt the performing arts communities and on multiple levels, what can we then do to go to encourage those diverse creative communities? Rosie, could you come in first on that?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that come to mind on that. I think one of the things that the early career artists, but also the other artists that we engaged in on the Hearts Project told us was the impact of precarity, so financial precarity, job instability, on their livelihoods, on their well-being. And going on from that, thinking about ways of having more sustainable funding models that allow people not only to enter the creative industries, but also to stay in it. So to be able to make enough money to stay in it, to have a satisfying, long-term, financially viable career. And of course, that impacts on diversity as well, making sure that people who want to work in the arts can work and stay in the arts. And then the second point, it links to where I finished the previous one around the role of technology and digital opportunities, and especially in terms of people who might be engaging with the arts in day-to-day life, thinking about how we can harness the work that happened, for example, online or in hybrid settings during the pandemic, and make that into something sustainable. And there's been quite a lot of research around that shows that, of course, there were frustrations and challenges with some of that work. It might not be the same making music, for example, online, but also that there were great possibilities for that, and ways that it could allow more people to take part, people who perhaps can't leave home easily, people who have caring responsibilities, all of those sorts of things.
Josh, is there anything you'd like to add in terms of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Rosie's points are really well made. I mean, there are long-standing systemic issues that we know about diversity in the creative industries. We know that the creative industries are overwhelmingly, disproportionately represented by people of higher socioeconomic backgrounds, and it's a trend that's getting worse. And there's been some of the Creative Peck research which has looked into this. There's also a lot of evidence that in terms of ethnic diversity, not anywhere near as close as we would like to be on that, or arguably, that we should be. I think beyond that, though, there's a lot of these issues, the issues of precarity, the issues of income. There's also issues around geographical inequality as well. One of the things about creative industries is that we know that in the UK, yes, we're very successful, but a huge chunk of creative industries happens in London and the Southeast. And what happens to the person who is a creative in somewhere in North Wales or somewhere in Lancashire, somewhere in a small town in the West Midlands? Those types of places, those types of people. One of the challenges that we face is trying to be able to build creative communities for people wherever they are. And I think that sort of partially comes to the point of technology as well. And technology has some way to bridge that gap a little bit. But at the same time, there are real persistent challenges in trying to build these robust communities wherever they are. The challenges are substantial, and they often relate to the structural models of the industries themselves. And so in many cases, it's not even kind of a sticking plaster solution. It's something which requires more fundamental rethinks of how do we think about the arts? How do we think about the value of these things in society? How do we value diversity in these things? What types of opportunities do we want to be providing to young people and older people who want to engage in these types of careers? And that's a real challenge.
In terms of those changes that you're suggesting, they are major. And do those come through differences that we need to encourage within new policy? Does it come perhaps in terms of encouraging people across different sectors to work together? Is it through research or is it through education? What are the vehicles that we can use to affect this change?
I think it's all of the above and more. I think there's a lot there's roles for everyone involved. Yes, there's definitely policy things that need to be addressed. There are challenges in the way that freelancers are handled within this economic system that we have is not necessarily, I would say, I mean, it is disadvantageous. The question is, what exactly does a better system look like? And I think that's an interesting and contested issue that we could get to or could park. But I think, so yes, there are policy interventions. There's also, the institutions that are commissioning work, hiring people, thinking about the practices there. And there's also a role that we have as people who work in university. So I'm based in the business school at the University of Sussex. And we as educators have a job to be bringing in a diverse group of people, but also to be giving them the skills that they need to be able to engage with the world in which they're operating, trying to prepare people with knowledge and being able to say, okay, in your future, in your career, yes, you may be a freelancer, but what types of skills do you need in addition to your, I say technical, artistic skills or whatever, specialist knowledge you have to be able to best build a career from the work that you're doing. treating yourself as saying, okay, yes, I'm working as a freelancer, but also, I'm also going to be basically a self-employed business owner. How do I deal with the tax system? How do I deal with things like this? And I think that's an interesting challenge that we face. And it doesn't directly address the question of diversity, but I think it's something that we can do, because if we're actually able to bring people along and equip our students with skills to be able to be engaging with it's not even the job market, but it's the system in which art is produced, I think that helps to give people more and more of an advantage.
If I may just come in on that, just picking up on this point about all of the skills that are required in these sorts of careers. As part of the Hearts Professional Project, we asked professionals what sort of support they would want. And one of the things they said was how much they valued the sense of being part of a community, and especially for freelancers, and how much of that was about exactly what you're describing. So being able to be around other people who get it, who have the same sort of possibilities, the same sort of challenges, who might feel similarly sort of on their own at times as a freelancer, especially within the sort of bigger systemic supports that were likely not available to them during the pandemic. So thinking around things like networks, peer-to-peer support, mentoring, all of these sorts of things was something that came out quite a lot in our data as something that would really support, especially freelancers, to be able to sort of navigate those creative industries that they're working within.
One of the issues that we have in our research on creative industries is trying to make the creative industries fully visible to a policy community. Perfectly honestly, we don't know how many freelancers there are in the UK, how many arts freelancers there are. We can guess, and we've got some figures of people who, depending on how they reported in the census and things like this, but we don't know how much money they're making. We don't know really exactly where they are living. We don't know. There's lots and lots of things that we don't know about them, and there's lots of things we don't know about the companies that employ them. So perhaps less so in an arts context, but companies that may have one or two core employees and may be working with teams of 10, 15, 20 freelancers alongside them. We don't really know that much about how they work, how those types of careers work, what types of career trajectories look like. And this is part of the work that we're trying to do, is trying to capture and codify some of these more, it's not even vague, but they're difficult to quantify issues, and in the process trying to then be able to help to translate that into policy asks so that policymakers can begin to understand what is going on within the sector. But it's an ongoing battle.
It occurs to me that the translation work from research to policy is not a trivial one, and it may even require a different skill set than your standard researcher may have. So I think perhaps we need to look at broadening out our skill base within our research communities to include those people who are able to specialize in policy translation. Rosie, can I come to you and ask, what for you and from your perspective, what do you think the next steps in research are?
I think one thing that strikes me is that there was this sort of explosion of research during and sort of just after the pandemic around, I mean, in a lot of disciplines, but certainly in ours. And I think one of the important things is that doesn't stop, that this sort of momentum, I suppose, in really trying to understand what it was like to be a creative worker during that time doesn't stop. So I'm thinking of building databases that continue to track these experiences, so sort of longitudinal work, which does take time, so in a way sort of speaks against your point. But if those data sets were set up and managed in a way that data could be quickly extracted at a moment when there's a policy demand or a policy need, then perhaps that could be one way of sort of bringing these things together a little bit more.
Having come through the pandemic, and now we have some insight in terms of how COVID-19 had an impact on the performing arts sector and the wider cultural and creative sectors. What should we learn from this, and how can we move forward? How should we think about moving forward?
I think this picks up on some of the points that I was touching on before, which is that, as you say, we sometimes in the arts, we can be sort of first hit by these things. And I think what that says to me is that we need to be able to think flexibly. And that means that we need to educate people who are entering this profession to be able to think and to be creatively flexible. And I think that's something that we are doing more and more, but I think it's something that we could still do better. And I think we could still invest more in the diversity of skills that people are going to need entering these professions.
I completely agree with Rosie on this. I mean, I think the idea of flexibility, helping our students, our young professionals to be aware that they are coming into this in a changing world where there will be new skills that will be needed, and they have a robust core of training, obviously, which we as educators hope to give them, but at the same time, hoping to give them those skills of flexibility to be able to deal with turbulence, and skills, around collaboration, being able to work with other people, being able to adjust to new technologies and adapt to those, and trying to find ways to work with those, to work in other settings, and thinking about ways of building up best practice, well, not even best practice, building up new ways of working, new ways of engaging to continue doing what they're doing with that type of flexible way.
Josh, can I ask you to reflect on the major policy messages that you can actually outline for us in terms of supporting the creative workforce?
I think there are a number of key areas that we have identified as key areas for support. One is about trying to broaden the geographical scope of where activity is, where investment is in the UK. At the moment, we're very fortunate. If you're based in London or if you're around London, there's everything here. But how we can actually broaden out the economic opportunities, particularly in the creative industries, to a much broader part of the UK. And I mean, we see, there's lots of activities in creative industries currently in other parts of the UK. Manchester is growing, Cardiff, Newcastle, Edinburgh. There's lots of other places that have very interesting creative clusters going on.
Josh, your research focuses on creative clusters. Can you explain what that means?
Yes, so creative clusters is an idea that creative businesses, creative workers work better when they are in close proximity to each other. And this is a really powerful concept. And it sometimes can sound a little bit vague, but to go with sort of the most famous example, think about Hollywood. Hollywood is a creative cluster. If you go to Hollywood, there's lots of people in the film business. There are actors, there are directors, there are screenwriters, there are all of the technical skills you need, and they're all there in Hollywood. And that type of thing that you see in Hollywood, or in Nashville for country music, or in Soho in London for screen and post-production and things like this, and there's lots and lots of other examples of this. This is a really important phenomenon for creative industries because it indicates that when creative workers and creative businesses are there in proximity, they're able to benefit from each other, and they can create emergent properties from being co-located. There's a growing group of creative clusters around the UK. So the most recent analysis that was done by the UK government identified 55 creative clusters in the UK at the city level. But one of the things that we did in our research, which I think is really important, and it ties in very much to the point about creative communities, is that we also, in some of our research that we did a couple of years ago, we started to actually think about, well, that's not really the whole story. Because yes, you've got London, but coming back to what I was just saying, you've also got Soho, or you've got Brixton, you've got Shoreditch. You've got different places that have little sub-areas. They're neighborhoods. They're not big cities. They're much smaller places. And that's where there's lots of creative activity that also goes on. And so we began to do a little bit of work analyzing this using some machine learning tools and some things using some scraped web data that allowed us to identify what we call creative microclusters. And the idea of creative microclusters is that actually there are hubs of creative activity that may just be in a couple of streets. They may be in neighborhoods. They might be maybe in towns. And they might be things that don't necessarily show up when you look at the big map and you say, there are 55 creative clusters. And if you're not in one of those 55 creative clusters, then tough luck. what we've tried to do then is, by broadening that out, we're actually saying, actually, you know what, there are hubs of creative activity all over the UK. And that's a really important point from a policy perspective, because we're saying these creative clusters, these emergent benefits, they can happen anywhere.
What is the role of interdisciplinarity in micro and larger clusters? So how can we learn from one set of practitioners, artists who may be in close proximity to us, and take what they're doing without reinventing wheels?
We're finding more evidence that there are positive benefits from the sort of interdisciplinary working, and people working together, people sharing knowledge, and people bumping into each other informally. And it may not even necessarily be through formal working arrangements. It may be you see the same people in the coffee shop, or you see people down in the pub, or you see things like this. And these are the ways that these relationships begin to grow and to evolve, and they begin to set the way for new types of collaboration and new opportunities that may emerge, whether that's creative, whether that's economic, whether it's something else. And I think that's something which is really interesting about these types of proximities. And that's one of the really thing that makes the clusters concept so powerful, is it actually allows us to bring those together.
I think as well, just picking up on that, we haven't really talked yet about creative health and the sort of explosion of work that there's been in recent years during the pandemic and since, and indeed before, around creative health or arts in health. And I think that's another example of interdisciplinarity and how different people working in different sectors coming together can create new opportunities. So that within creative health, you have artists, of course, you have people from different disciplines within health psychology, psychiatry, etc., all sorts of disciplines. And I think providing those opportunities for connection and collaboration is another way in which we see new opportunities arising for creative workers and new things happening within that space. So this idea of clusters, it's creative clusters, but of course there's also lots of other disciplines around that are also shaping these futures.
Within the arts, I mean, there are a number of skills that we seek to impart and to inspire, to foster among our students. And I wonder if you could both think and reflect on when that education should start. We're very good within music, for example, and working with young musicians to get their scales played and to hone those instrumental technical abilities as well as how to perform. But there are other skills that are situated around that. And so when do we start that education?
I think the question about the provision of education, when do we introduce skills to young people and art skills, I think there's a really interesting shift that we are facing that I think we really need to have, because as we know, arts education, particularly in schools, has been under financial pressure for a number of years. And we've had positive news from the new government indicating that they are aware of this, but I don't know at what point that situation will be addressed. But I think one of the things that is really required for thinking about arts education is we really need a fundamental rethink, because for a long time, the view of arts education in school is, oh, it's a nice thing, but actually, reading, writing, and arithmetic, that's the stuff that really matters. And we've been very much focused on that. But I think one of the things, when we come back to the headline stuff that we talk about with the creative industries, when we say that the creative industries are a major part of the UK economy, bigger than oil and gas in the UK, well, they're talking about STEM and STEM skills and things like this, but actually, surely from an economic perspective, there's an economic logic to be providing our children with skills for the things that the UK is good at. And guess what we're good at? We're good at creative stuff. So actually not encouraging that and discouraging children, particularly at younger ages, from being exposed to things where in areas where we know there will be jobs, there will be careers in the future. We don't know what they're going to look like, but providing them those range of experiences seems very, very sensible.
So, and we know on the one hand that the arts will make and do make a major contribution to the UK economy. On the other hand, Rosie, we also know that the arts make a huge difference in people's lives. Can you reflect on what the benefits of the arts are within society for public health, for individual health?
I was just thinking that as you were talking, that of course we also know that all sorts of arts engagement, creative engagement can support many aspects of health and well-being. Social well-being, sense of feeling connected to other people, mental well-being, psychological well-being. It can reduce symptoms of things like stress and anxiety and depression. So there's also all sorts of reasons that our young people should be able to engage in creative activities during their education. And I think that's something that can be done in all sorts of ways. It doesn't have to necessarily be a music lesson on a Thursday or an art lesson on a Friday. It can be in the ways that young people are encouraged to be creative day to day. Those opportunities can come through in all sorts of subjects and all sorts of areas within schools, as well, of course, as in specialist provision and specialist lessons. But I think it's a sort of cultural shift. So let's allow our young people to be creative at school. And there's many, many ways that we can do that. And it's going to be great for the future economy. It's going to be great for health and well-being of those young people as well.
We seem to have landed in a spot where we agree that there is some degree of change in terms of supporting the creative workforce better. And I wonder if you could reflect on who are the key people out there who can help us bring that change about.
I think change needs to come from a number of places. Obviously, I tend to spend a lot of my time thinking and dealing with central government or devolved governments and local authorities and other regions and things like this. And I think there is a strong role for messaging to government about the importance of these issues and the possibility of there being different types of futures. And I think that is an important message that we need to be taking out. And part of that is based on, there's a number of ways that we can sort of get that message out. And so part of that is through, obviously the creative industries are very well placed because they have faces that people recognize. And we're here today in the Royal College of Music, and when I walked in through the doors, I was like, "Ooh, this is cool," and that's something which the creative industries has that a lot of other sectors don't. But also at the same time, there's a need to back up the cool factor with evidence and clearly kind of sober thinking through about what are the asks, what are the things that need to be done, and trying to codify that. So there's that level of communicating to the broader policy audiences. But then I think there's also a need for change through the entire sector. There's a lot to be said for leadership from the front. And creative organizations being able to say, look, we've set out these values. We're going to live by these values, and we're going to take a proactive role in trying to achieve what it is we want to do. I think it's not going to be. It's a bit like the situation with the climate crisis. It's not just one factor or one government that actually would be able to actually move the needle. It's going to require lots of actors pulling in a broadly similar direction, even if everyone's not pulling in exactly the same direction, to be able to make the changes that are required. And I think that's the type of thing that we would be thinking about here. It's going to take a lot of different actors working together and on their own, but trying to move in a better direction for the future of the sector.
Thanks to my guests, Josh Siepel and Rosie Perkins, and to you for listening. In the next series of Performance Science, we will be asking how can the two disciplines of the arts and health work together to support health and well-being in society. Thanks to production support from Caitlin Shaughnessy, Frederick Lamb, and Michael Durrant of the Center for Performance Science, Nick Flatt at Panda, Chris Garrington of Research Podcasts, and the Arts and Humanities Research Council for their generous support.